Deficit spending will actually be reduced by a factor of 6 in the next 8 years. Factor of 6.
30 seconds for anybody who cares to do it.
Yeah, the congressman mentioned that a few minutes ago that the system is rigged against the middle class, and that's just what I'm talking about. If we put people out of work, and some of these small businesses, we put them out of work, we're putting the middle class out of work. And it goes back to the old saying by Ronald Reagan, talking about that forgotten American, that simple soul who goes to work every day and bucks for a raise and pays for his kids to go to school and contributes to his local church and charity. And he knows at the end of the day there's no such thing as a free lunch. We need to fight for the middle class. But it's just a matter of philosophy how we do this. And I'm sure that the congressman wants to put people back to work. We all want to put people back to work. We're the second highest unemployment rate in the United States of America here. This is we can do better than this. We must do better than this. But we don't want to hurt the small businesses in the process.
I think, again, this is a big difference between me and Mr. Doherty and the House Republicans in Washington who believe the same thing that Mr. Doherty does. This is based on an economic theory that says, give people at the very top a big tax increase, and it will trickle down to the rest of us. Less regulation, big tax cuts, and it will trickle down, and it will work. That's what was tried during the Bush presidency. We had the worst job growth in 50 years. It doesn't work. And so what the middle class needs is protection from a tax increase. You need to let the tax cuts expire for the top 2%, to pay down the national debt so we can be serious about that responsibility and reject this notion of trickle-down economics. It's a failed economic policy.
Yes. Mrs. Vogel?
Yes.
I want to move to social policy questions for a minute here and ask, first of all, in 2011, the House of Representatives voted largely on party lines to defund Planned Parenthood. The Senate rejected that effort. If a similar bill were to be introduced in the House after you take office, first I'd like to ask, would you vote for or against the repeal of funding for Planned Parenthood? And related to this, would you share with the audience, please, your position on Congress's role with respect to reproductive choice, access to contraception, and abortion rights? And we'll begin with Representative Congressman Cicilline.
I had the honor of standing up and fighting against the defunding of Planned Parenthood when that vote came to the floor. I strongly support Planned Parenthood. I strongly support full reproductive health care for women and their right, and I am pro-choice. I think what has happened in the Congress over the last 2 years amounts to an attack on women's rights, whether it's in the area of reproductive health care, equal pay for equal work, the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, but I believe that people must recognize that Planned Parenthood provides health care to many, many women outside of the termination of a pregnancy, mammograms, cervical cancer exams, etc. And the efforts to defund Planned Parenthood, I think, were wrong. We fought hard against it. I know Governor Romney supports it. Said that he would advocate defunding Planned Parenthood. We have to protect women's health. We have to be sure that women have access to full reproductive health care. And if I have the honor of representing the state for 2 more years, I will continue to be a very strong voice. And I'm very proud that I've been endorsed by NARAL and Planned Parenthood and other national women's organizations for my work. And I'm really honored to have that support.
Colonel Doherty.
Yes, I would not vote for any funding for Planned Parenthood as it relates to abortion. As an article of my faith, I'm pro-life, but I support Planned Parenthood in many of their the training that they do and what they offer to society. They do a great job in some areas, but I just do not support any monies going, any funds going to as it relates to abortion.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
I'll preface my remarks by pointing out, even the Congressman knows this, I'm not a strict constructionist, but personally I actually believe that the Bill of Rights was put there for a reason. And from my point of view, anything religiously based or socially based is fully covered by the First Amendment and should remain so. That should pretty much give you an idea of where I would be. I would fight for abortion rights. I would fight for pro-choice. I would definitely not defund the social activities of Planned Parenthood in any way, shape, or form. But I also believe, on the other hand, that a true separation of church and state really needs to be there, and civil rights actually need to be protected. It is appalling to me that civil rights, your civil rights, have become nothing but bargaining chips in Washington.
Thank you. And any responses, or 30 seconds? Okay. On the question of the Defense of Marriage Act, do you support, I think this one's going to be quick, do you support or oppose the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act? Mr. Vogel.
Kill it.
Colonel Doherty?
I support, I oppose the DOMA. I believe that that's a state issue.
Thank you.
Does that mean you would support a state DOMA?
You know, I've said that, first of all, I'll answer that question, it's not yours.
Well, I think the question is, well, of course, I'm a co-sponsor of the repeal of DOMA, but I do think it's a...
I've answered your question that I would vote to repeal DOMA. I think it's a state issue.
What about at the state level?
I'm gonna ask if Colonel Doherty, I asked the question about the on the congressional level. It's Congressman Cicilline's turn for the microphone,
Right.
however.
Well, I'm a co-sponsor of the repeal of DOMA, and I think it shouldn't exist. We should respect marriage equality, period. And I certainly hope people would be interested to know whether members of Congress think that marriage equality belongs, a state DOMA is appropriate, because I don't think it is either. I'm happy to say that.
No, I didn't say that I support a state DOMA. I'm just saying that in my view, my position is that I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. And so I'd support the repeal of DOMA.
I'm going to move on. I believe Colonel Doherty answered the question as it was asked. Before I go on, I'm going to ask this. How many people in the audience have questions that they would like to ask?
Me.
Dean, what do you think? One more, or?
Good. Time for another quick one in the audience?
I'll ask this one, because the person who put it forward asked strongly that we asked, and we haven't really asked a foreign policy question. So what lessons do you take from our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? If you think those wars were a mistake, how would you use your position in Congress to avoid a repeat of that experience? If you stand by American intervention, why do you think it was a good idea? And perhaps what could be done better in future cases, or what have we done right? And I think I went out of order, so I think I've lost track, but I think Colonel Doherty.
Yeah, I believe that it was a war of necessity, but I believe that we should bring our troops home as soon as possible now. We have been training, engaged in a training period where we've had guns turned on our own troops. We're the best and brightest military in the world. We need to support them, but we need to bring them home as soon as possible. I think any lessons that could be, well, I'm sure there's many, many lessons, but we are there to support and improve the governance of the Karzai government. And I believe that we could be there for another 10 years and not achieve any more than we have already. So I believe it's time to bring our troops home.
Thank you. Mr. Bowman.
For me, something that was amazingly telling and something that was almost lost in the news, as the last official troops were pulling out of Baghdad about a year ago, literally they had just gotten on the plane. The plane was, I think, maybe halfway up to cruising altitude. 23 bombs went off in Baghdad. 10 years, and depending on the estimates you look at, anywhere between 1 trillion and 3 trillion of American dollars, God knows how many lives. And all that we get is 23 bombs going off as the plane is taking off from the Baghdad airport. To me, that doesn't seem like such a success. And I think we need to take the lesson from that we cannot be the world's policeman. We cannot practice imperialism through our military. And we need to find more productive ways to deal with our money and our resources.
Congressman Cicilline.
I had the privilege of going to Afghanistan and seeing with my own eyes some of the work that is being done there. And I want to first say that whatever your position on these wars, I think we all recognize the incredible sacrifices of our brave men and women. We've lost over 2,000 American heroes in this war. But the reality is we are now engaged in the longest war in our history. We've been there 11 years. We will spend over $100 billion this year rebuilding roads. Part of that is rebuilding roads and bridges and schools and training police officers when we're cutting the same things in our own country. I think we have no sense yet of what will be the final result, whether we will have left behind a governing democracy or not. And I think there are an enormous amount of lessons to be learned when you begin to comprehend the real cost of this war. I went to Walter Reed and met with some young man who lost limbs in Afghanistan, and I think we haven't even begun to fully calculate the cost of this war in terms of the cost to American lives. And I think Mr. Vogel is right. We really have to understand that we cannot engage in conflicts all over the world and rebuild governments in a form that we might hope for them, that responsibility has to principally come from their own people, and the Afghan people have the responsibility to take over the civilian and military operations in Afghanistan. I've been part of a growing bipartisan group in the Congress, Jim McGovern on the Democratic side, Walter Long Walter Jones, excuse me, on the Republican side, working together to really press the administration as hard as we can for a responsible but expeditious conclusion of our operations in Afghanistan. It's time to end our involvement there as quickly and responsibly as we can.
Thank you. Does anyone want to use 30 seconds to? Well, since we know a lot of people came here with a desire to ask questions, I don't want to. I'm going to leave some of these on the table here and give you all a chance. But just to say, I want to make sure everybody understands that we're here to ask questions, not make speeches. So please keep those to yourself. Just ask the question. Keep it as short and direct as you want to. I know people want to ask questions of specific candidates. That's fine, I won't stop that, but please remember that, and we will give everybody a chance to respond on each question, just as we did before. So the gentleman here is very eager.
I'm a little confused, okay? Mr. Doherty, you have stated that you are in favor of Medicare. You've stated that you're in favor of Social Security. You've stated that you're in favor of Obamacare. At least I thought I heard that tonight. Yet you're running as a Republican. And Governor Romney has said on the day that he takes office, he is going to repeal Obamacare. The leadership of the Republican Party is clearly, their goal is to destroy Medicare and destroy Social Security. How can you possibly run as a Republican and think that you're going to be effective when you don't even support your own party?
Thank you.
Thank you for asking that. I believe it's important to that you know that I'm an independent thinker, and yes, I am Republican. I'm a Republican because I'm fiscally conservative, and I think that we have too much fraud and waste in government. And that's something that I want to shine a light on. But as it relates to Social Security and Medicare, I go back to harken back to the Simpson-Bowles plan. And Simpson-Bowles strengthens Social Security. My mother's 85 years old. I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but she's not well, and she relies heavily on Social Security and Medicare. She's 85 years old. I understand the plight of some of these folks who are worried about Medicare and Social Security. They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to be. In the plan that I have, it actually strengthens Social Security, so when someone's 85, or someone's been on as a beneficiary for 20 years, they actually get another bump. So I'm an independent thinker. I've already said that, and I said earlier here today, that when I go to Washington, if a bill came before me to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, if there wasn't a better plan, a stronger plan in effect, and I wouldn't vote for it.
You haven't answered my question.
Well, I think I did.
No, you didn't. My question was, how can you go to Washington as a Republican and not support your own party? How are you going to be effective doing that?
You can answer or not.
Yeah, well, okay.
Okay.
So let me answer.
In other words, you won't be.
Excuse me, sir.
Let me answer that for you. we talk about bipartisanship. We need people to work together, because if it's just a party line, we're not going to go anywhere, sir. So if you just run for Congress as a Democrat just for a rubber stamp for the Democratic Party, that's not going to do it. And the same thing with the Republicans. I've said before that Democrats come up with good ideas and Republicans come up with good ideas, and we need to come up with bipartisan solutions to problems. And that's the answer.
Thank you. Congressman?
Yes.
I'm going to ask everybody, if you can hold your applause for until the very end, that would be great. Appreciate it. Congressman Cicilline.
I think it does matter who we send to Congress and what side of the aisle they sit on. And of course, we have a responsibility to work together. We have a responsibility to work together and solve problems. That's hopefully why people go to Congress. And there are lots of ways to be doing that, and we should be doing it. There's no question it's not happening enough. But I think we have to do it in a way that honors the values that are important to Rhode Islanders. And going there and making sure that we're fighting for the things that matter to Rhode Islanders. And the question raises an important point. Who we send to Washington will help decide who controls the Congress. And unlike lots of other bodies, who controls the Congress, they decide what bills are heard, what bills are voted on, and what the agenda is for the next 2 years. The President of the United States, the American Jobs Act, a comprehensive jobs bill, never got voted on, never had a hearing, because the House Republican leadership decided it wasn't going to get one. So it does matter what party, what side of the aisle you sit on when you get to Washington. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to work together and find common ground and solve problems. Of course, you're expected to do that. But my opponent, Mr. Doherty, keeps talking about Simpson Bowles and Social Security. Simpson Bowles, let's be clear about this. Simpson Bowles raises the Social Security age and cuts Social Security benefits. Now, Social Security used to be one leg of a three-legged stool. You have your private pension from your company, you have your savings, and you have Social Security. That's not the case for many people now. They've seen their savings evaporate, pensions are gone, and people rely more and more on Social Security. So we should be looking at ways that we can increase Social Security so that seniors can live with dignity and have their basic needs met. And we should not be considering proposals to cut benefits for Social Security. And particularly, we should not be looking, I think, to raise the retirement age. I was at a factory this past week of gentlemen are working with resin. Tough work. By the time they're 67, they're spent. They can't work another year. And we have to think about that. And so I think that those provisions of Simpson Bowles are a bad idea.
There are a handful of independents in the House. Mr. Bowler, do you want to comment on party loyalty?
I'm not aware of any independents in the House. There's 2 in the Senate.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any in the House. But
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I did say the House, but he's exactly right.
yeah, there are 0. So, look, I actually like the 2 men sitting on the stage with me. I've known David for about 12 years, and I've met Colonel Doherty on a few occasions. These are both very, very fine men, and there's nothing that I would say bad about either one of them. But they're making my point, folks. The fact that Republican leadership or Democratic leadership stalls bills or keeps them from coming up, that means that we have 2 parties in Washington that are controlling their best interests, nobody controlling yours.
Colonel Doherty, did you want 30 seconds too? I'm going to ask this question from somebody who's not ordinarily shy, but who handed me the piece of paper. Who wanted to know, and I'll ask this question of all 3 of you, how many women and minorities are on your staff?
I'm a staff of 1.
Thank you.
I don't know exactly how many. I think there's probably about 50% women. There's probably, including the advisory board and the cabinet, there's probably about 4 or 5 minorities.
That's it?
How many?
How many?
How many? Out of about 25 people.
Out of how many?
About 25%. Congressman Cicilline?
I'm trying to
He's
make sure I
doing
don't
math.
forget anybody.
I think about half, maybe a little more than half of my staff are women.
Good.
What's the number?
There's 18 staff in total. There are 7, 8, and probably 40% are minority.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Jim?
the United States has no comprehensive energy policy. We're locked in buying oil and using coal and a little bit of nuclear. If you were to write an energy policy for the United States, how would it be different from what we're doing now?
What order we're in? Colonel, would you like to?
Sure, that's a great question, because we've been talking about energy independence since 1973, since the Arab oil embargo, and we really have not done a lot with it. We had a grand opportunity with the Keystone Pipeline, with 1,700 miles of pipeline to be laid by USA workers to put them back to work. But we don't have a policy. So I've embraced the Infrastructure Jobs and Energy Independence Act, which basically is developing energy resources on federal land to develop, let me just say, the Department of the Interior has said that we're never going to, the only way the U.S. is going to avoid an increase in imports is by tapping into America's offshore resources. So part of this plan helps our infrastructure, our renewable energy, energy efficiency, clean coal technology, clean water, wastewater infrastructure, and the piece that I wanted to put on that is to close our skill sets gap here in Rhode Island. But we do need a strong policy because we have tremendous opportunities here in the shales in the United States, the Marcellus Shale and the shales in Texas. So I think we can be an energy independent country.
Mr. Vogel?
Colonel Doherty hit something right on the head. When I was 6 years old was the first oil embargo, and I actually said to my dad, I think some of you know my dad, I said, how are we supposed to move this country, move our cars, light our home, do anything now that we're not getting oil? In the mind of a 6-year-old, it makes sense. If the energy is gone, well, how do you do anything? And if a 6-year-old can figure that out, it's kind of amazing that Congress couldn't figure it out 40 years hence. I suppose if I were to snap my fingers and write an energy policy, I would say, first of all, drilling for more fossil fuels is definitely not the answer. I would take some of the money that I was talking about before, because you asked me about specific cuts, and I think I gave you about $730 billion of them right off the top of my head. And I would actually start a federally funded Green Works project. A lot of people like to point to things like Solyndra as the reason that we shouldn't be engaging in green energy, and that's ridiculous. If you look at evolutionary patterns of anything, whether it's biological or not, there's always failures at the start. And failure at the start is not a reason to quit.
Yeah, I think the president's approach is right, and that is sort of all of the above. We need to really invest in renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal, natural gas. What I don't agree with is the HR 1861, which is the plan Mr. Doherty just spoke about. This is a giveaway to big oil. It does nothing to end the subsidies to big oil. This was the same model that the Republicans proposed to fund the transportation bill, to basically say give away more leases so it will generate more oil so we can pay for our infrastructure. But it comes up with a fraction over the long term of what we need to repair our infrastructure. So it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's a giveaway to big oil. We need to end the subsidies for big oil. We tried, I think, in 3 votes along party lines. Republicans fiercely protected that. And part of the reason we don't have an energy policy is the enormous power and influence of big oil on the Congress. Look at the donations big oil makes. Look at the donation the oil industry makes. They exercise. You tell me why there's a $4 billion annual subsidy to big oil. They made profits last year of $137 billion, an industry which does not need profit. It does not need a subsidy. And we attempted to take that subsidy away and invest in renewable energy. And I think every single Republican voted no on the repeal of those subsidies. So we need to have an energy policy that invests in renewable and clean energies. It's not drill, baby, drill. That bill that Mr. Doherty is talking about would actually authorize potentially drilling off the Rhode Island coastline, which I think is a terrible idea.
Response?
Yeah, that's actually not correct, that it would authorize drilling off the Rhode Island coastline. Come on, Congressman, you know better than that.
No, that is
This
correct,
creates
Mr. Doherty, you're wrong.
1.2 million, that
It
creates
authorized drilling in the
1.2 million
Atlantic,
jobs per
Northeast,
year.
counted that shell.
1.2 million jobs per year and $2.4 trillion in revenue over 10 years to the United States. So I'm espousing a plan that would take revenue out of the ground to distribute it to help stimulate our economy. The Congressman wants to take money out of people's back pocket to redistribute wealth.
Any further response?
Yeah, I'm not sure we should redistribute wealth. The energy bill that Mr. Doherty is talking about would allow for potentially drilling off in the Atlantic, which would include the Rhode Island area. So there's no prohibition in the bill. It authorizes leasing in that area. So, you know, I think our coastline is something we have to protect. And I think, but let me finish.
You know this is a bipartisan bill, right?
No, you keep saying it's a bipartisan bill. There are 6 Democrats who signed it. It hasn't gotten a co-sponsor in over a year.
Your friend Congressman Costa
It hasn't moved. It's not moving anywhere. And by the way, I think drilling off the Rhode Island coastline is a terrible idea. And already the United States has more drilling, more oil wells than the rest of the world combined.
That's disingenuous.
So we don't need any more oil wells.
So Colonel Doherty, you already had your 30 seconds, but I'll give you one.
Well, it's disingenuous. I'm obviously not advocating for drilling off the coast of Rhode Island.
Well, then you shouldn't support H.R. 1861 because there's no prohibition, there's no protection for Rhode Island in that bill.
You're talking about things that matter to the people of the state of Rhode Island. And we mentioned that a few times. The things that matter are honesty, integrity, and transparency.
Thank you. I think we need a fact checker here, and we don't have one, so we'll let that one go for now. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Drilling off the coast of Rhode Island is one thing. Then you talk about getting the gas out of the Marcellus Shale. Half of New York is anti-drilling because they know what happened in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, they're having
Ma'am, do you have a question for the candidate?
Yes. Why don't we have money spent for, instead of drilling and destroying our water, why don't we have a solar panel that's affordable for every house in this country and get off fossil fuel?
That's a great statement you made, and we do need to we do need an all of the above energy policy. So we need to look at solar and wave harnessing and wind.
To your point, going back to what I said a few minutes ago, the reason I said take a lot of money and put it into Greenworks is because I'm actually a big believer in technology. I grew up with it. I sort of straddle the non-technology and technology age. But one thing's for certain, technology innovation leads to more innovation, which leads to reduction in costs and prices. It's pretty simple, but drilling for more fossil fuels is definitely not the answer.
I agree. I agree, and I think, you know, this is about making the right investments in the development and production of clean energy. And, you know, the President, I don't know if people watched the debate last night, the President really spoke about the importance of this, of our energy independence, and about the importance of investing in the development and production of clean energy. And I do think that, you know, our coastline, the whole New England coastline is something we need to protect. It's an asset. And we can do both things. We can produce energy, and we can be good stewards of our environment. And that should be our responsibility to do both of those things well.
Thank you.
So I just am curious. You guys all talk about Obamacare and how wonderful it's going to be and it's going to cover so many people. Why do we then need to spend money on Planned Parenthood? Doesn't that seems to me like waste? Double spending. I don't get it. Can you explain why we need both?
Yeah, well, I think there's no question that when healthcare reform is implemented in its entirety, there will be people who are accessing the healthcare system through that will not need to access it through Planned Parenthood, but will not cover everybody. So I think the objective should be that we should ensure that everyone has access to quality, affordable healthcare. I think we all recognize quality, affordable healthcare is a basic necessity of life, and I think that we should be thinking about a system where we cover as many people as we can. And frankly, there's two approaches to reducing healthcare costs. One is raise the premiums and limit the number of people who can access the system by raising their ages, etc. That's one way you can reduce costs. I think that's not the best way to do it. I think the way to do it is what's reflected in healthcare reform, which is have as many people in the system as possible and drive down costs by investments in prevention, wellness, by growing the number of people who are in